A poor girl goes to the airport every single day holding a photo. A young billionaire, curious after seeing her so many times, asks, "Why do you always come here?" She answers, "My mum said that one day my dad would come back." When she shows him her mom's picture, he freezes and starts crying uncontrollably. The main lobby of the airport was a world of its own. People of all types crossed the wide space in different directions, lugging suitcases, checking their watches, talking on their phones. A place where stories brushed against each other without ever truly meeting. Noah Parker walked through it as if he owned the place, exuding the confidence of someone used to opening doors simply by showing up. Dressed in a navy blue suit that cost more than many cars, the CEO of Tech Vision checked his phone messages for what felt like the 1,000th time. Launching the new international branch had consumed all his time in recent weeks. It was an ambitious project, requiring constant meetings in different cities to align the details of the massive deal that would change the company's standing. "Mr. Parker, your priority boarding starts in 10 minutes, informed Sarah, his personal assistant, as efficient as ever. "Thank you, Sarah. Go on ahead." "I want to stretch my legs a bit more." Sarah nodded and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. It was in that brief pause in his frenetic schedule that Noah noticed her for the first time. A small girl sat alone on one of the metal benches. She didn't look lost or scared, just waiting. Her legs swung in the air, not reaching the floor. She wore a red coat far too big for her, clutching a photograph in her hands that seemed to have been folded and unfolded hundreds of times. What caught Noah's attention was the way she studied every passenger crossing her line of sight. Her watchful eyes scanned face after face, as if looking for someone specific. After each disappointment, she would glance again at the crumpled photo, seemingly seeking confirmation that she was indeed searching for the right person. Noah felt a strange twinge in his chest, a discomfort, like an unwelcome memory threatening to surface. There was something uncannily familiar about the scene. "Final call for priority boarding on flight 745 to Boston," the loudspeaker announced. Forcing himself to tear his gaze away from the girl, Noah headed for the gate. Business awaited him. A $2.7 billion acquisition could not be delayed by passing sentimental impulses. 3 days later, while boarding a flight to Chicago for a crucial meeting with investors interested in the new branch, Noah saw her again. Same bench, same red coat, same photograph. The same intense concentration as she examined each passing face. Something about that silent dedication deeply unsettled him. "That girl," Noah found himself asking one of the airport employees, "is she always there?" The man looked in the direction Noah indicated and smiled with familiarity. "Oh, yeah. The little one in the red coat. She comes almost every day after school. Her mom works at the bookstore in the terminal and lets her wait there. Everyone knows her by now. And what is she looking for?" The employee shrugged. "No one's sure. She doesn't talk much. She just sits there, looking at everyone who walks by, probably just a child's game." But Noah knew it wasn't a game. There was a seriousness in that girl's expression that was almost painful to see. That same Friday, returning from a meeting in Seattle with the architects responsible for the new branch design, Noah encountered her once more. It was already late evening, and the airport traffic had diminished considerably. The girl was still there, tireless in her solitary vigil. Noah could no longer ignore that presence that, for some inexplicable reason, disturbed him so much. Something about that constant waiting stirred parts of himself he preferred to keep dormant. Memories of another airport, of another farewell. Grace. The name appeared in his mind without warning, like an unwelcome visitor knocking at the door. Grace, with her bright eyes and easy laughter. Grace, to whom he had promised he would return after just 1 year in Silicon Valley. Grace, whom he had left behind while climbing rung after rung in his brilliant career. In his first-class seat, Noah closed his eyes, trying to banish the memories that belonged to the past, a closed chapter of his life. He had made choices, prioritizing ambition over relationships, and those choices had taken him exactly where he wanted to be, the top. Then why did the sight of that girl waiting at the airport bother him so much? The following Monday, Noah could have sent his vice president to the meeting in Dallas with the technology suppliers for the new branch. It was a negotiation that did not necessarily require his presence, but he went anyway, knowing he would pass through the airport once more. And there she was, like a constant in a universe of variables, the little figure in the red coat, sitting patiently, examining faces with a hope that renewed itself after each disappointment. Noah watched her from afar, feeling a mix of fascination and discomfort. One of the security guards walked by and waved at her in a friendly gesture. The girl returned the wave, shyly, before resuming her task. How long has she been waiting? Noah found himself thinking. It was a dangerous question, one that led to others even more threatening. How long had Grace waited for him? Had she waited for his return as she promised? Or had she moved on, realizing that some promises were never meant to be fulfilled? Mr. Parker. The voice of the pilot of his private jet brought him back to the present. We're ready to take off whenever you'd like. Noah nodded, stepping away from the observation window. Let's go. As the aircraft climbed higher, Noah couldn't shake the image of the girl from his mind. There was something in that stubborn waiting that got under his skin, silently accusing him. He, who never looked back, who always moved forward with a predator's determination, now found himself haunted by the image of a child waiting in an airport. Fairchild who, without saying a word, could ask the questions he had spent years avoiding. Thursday, returning from New York after signing crucial contracts for international expansion, the same scene, like a film stuck on repeat. The girl in the red coat, the wrinkled photograph, the endless waiting. This time, something broke inside Noah. Some invisible barrier he had kept standing for years. He had a decision to make. He could continue walking past that child like he had walked past countless people in his life, offering a quick, indifferent glance, focused solely on his next goal. Or he could stop for the first time in a long while and truly see. Noah Parker, the relentless CEO, the brilliant deal-maker, the man who never let emotions interfere with his decisions, felt strangely vulnerable when faced with this simple choice. Picking up his phone to postpone the next meeting, Noah made his decision. Tomorrow, when he came back, he wouldn't just watch the girl from a distance. Tomorrow he would talk to her. He would ask what she was looking for, who she awaited so faithfully. What Noah did not know as his plane cut through the clouds on its way home was that this simple decision would change the course of his life forever. That this solitary child in the airport was not just a stranger who had aroused his curiosity, but a mirror reflecting the man he had become, and maybe the man he could still be. The following week had been a whirlwind of commitments. The opening of the new branch demanded more of Noah than any other project in his career. Contracts being revised until late at night, phone calls with investors in impossible time zones, and the constant feeling that, even as CEO, there were a million details only he could handle. Yet in the midst of that storm of responsibilities, Noah couldn't forget the girl at the airport. That small figure with the oversized red coat had taken up residence in some corner of his mind, appearing in unexpected moments throughout the day. "Are you all right, sir?" his assistant asked during a meeting, catching him staring absently out the window. "Yes, of course," Noah replied, quickly refocusing on the matter at hand, but he wasn't all right. There was something about that child, about that silent waiting, that unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. On Friday, after finishing the final details of a contract with Japanese partners for the new branch, Noah decided to take a later flight than planned. There were no scheduled meetings for the late afternoon, and for the first time in years, he set aside a few hours in his calendar with no obligations. Even his assistant couldn't believe it when he announced he would be taking the afternoon off. "Are you sick?" she asked, half joking, half concerned. Noah smiled but didn't answer. How could he explain that he was rearranging his schedule, dropping important obligations, just to speak to an unknown child in an airport? He himself barely understood his own actions. The airport lobby was busier than usual that Friday afternoon. Tourists eager to start the weekend, executives returning home after days of business trips. Noah navigated through the crowd with the ease of someone who knew every corner of that place. And there she was, right on time as always, the little Emily sitting on the same bench, holding the same photograph, watching each face with the same endless hope. Today, however, would be different. Today, Noah would not merely observe from afar. He approached slowly, feeling an unfamiliar hesitation. Here, he was not the ruthless CEO, the negotiator who closed billion-dollar deals without blinking. He was just a man approaching a child, unsure of what to say. "Hi," he finally said, stopping at a respectful distance. The girl looked up, surprised someone had addressed her. Her large, bright eyes studied Noah for a moment, as though trying to place him in some memory. "Hi," she responded, her voice timid but not afraid. "You're the man who always walks by here." The observation took Noah by surprise. He hadn't expected to be recognized. "Yes, that's me. My name is Noah." "What's yours?" "Emily," she said, adjusting herself on the bench that was too big for her. "Do you work here at the airport?" Noah smiled at the innocent question. "No, but I travel a lot. That's why I'm always passing through." He hesitated for a moment. "May I sit down?" Emily nodded, scooting over to make room on the bench. Noah took a seat, keeping a polite distance. There was something surprisingly natural about the interaction. He had expected the girl to be more wary of strangers. "You're always here," Noah commented, trying not to sound too direct. "Are you waiting for someone?" Emily's face lit up at the question, as though pleased someone was finally asking. "I'm waiting for my dad," she answered simply. "He went on a really long trip a while ago, but he's going to come back someday." Noah felt his chest tighten. There was something profoundly sad in those words, spoken with such childish certainty. "A really long trip?" he asked gently. Emily nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of pride and longing. "Mom says he had to travel to do important things. That he's really smart and works with computers." She recited it like a story she had heard many times before. "One day he'll come back, and I want to be here when it happens." "And how will you recognize him?" Noah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily raised the photograph she was holding, as though answering the most obvious question in the world. "Mom says he'll look like this picture, and he'll recognize me right away because we look alike." "May I see the photo?" Noah asked, carefully extending his hand. Emily hesitated for a moment, as though the picture were her greatest treasure. Then, with the trust only children can grant to strangers, she handed it to Noah. "This is my mom," Emily explained, pointing to the image. "Dad took this photo before he left." Noah lowered his gaze to the worn, weathered photograph. Everything around him seemed to slow down, the bustling noise of the airport fading into a distant murmur. In the photo, a young woman smiled at the camera, her brown hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and her eyes seemingly bright even on the faded paper. Grace. The same Grace he had left years ago, promising to return after just 1 year in Silicon Valley. The same Grace whose heart he had broken when the calls became fewer, the promises more hollow, until silence consumed them both. Noah froze. His entire body felt paralyzed, trapped in a devastating moment of recognition. The years had been kind to Grace. In the photo, she appeared more mature, but still as beautiful as he remembered. It was impossible. And yet, it made perfect sense. "Are you okay, Mr. Noah?" Emily's worried voice pulled him back to reality. Noah realized he had been silent far too long, staring at the photo with an expression that must have alarmed the girl. Now tears were sliding down his cheeks, something that hadn't happened in years. He wiped them quickly, trying to regain composure. "Yes, I'm fine," he managed to say, his voice betraying the emotion. "Your mom is very beautiful." Emily beamed with pride. "She's the prettiest in the whole world, and the smartest too. She teaches books at a big school." "Literature," Noah murmured, more to himself than to Emily. Grace had always wanted to be a literature teacher. She spoke of it with shining eyes when they first met, back when Noah was just a programmer with big dreams and not much else. "How did you know?" Emily asked, tilting her head curiously. Noah's heart raced. He had gone too far already. "I guessed from the way you talked about her," he improvised, returning the photo with trembling hands. "Emily, how long has your dad been away?" The girl thought for a moment, furrowing her brow as she tried to figure out a time clearly beyond her understanding. "Since before I was born," she finally answered. "Mom says he doesn't even know I exist, But when he comes back, he'll love me so much. Each word stabbed Noah's chest like a knife. The guilt he felt was overwhelming, mixed with something dangerously close to hope. Calculations formed automatically in his mind, the time since he left Grace, Emily's probable age. Could it be? "Why are you crying again?" Emily asked, noticing fresh tears that Noah hadn't even realized were falling. "Sometimes grown-ups get emotional when they hear beautiful stories," he responded, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "Your story reminded me of someone I met a long time ago." Emily studied him with unsettling intensity, as though seeing straight through the layers of defense he'd built over the years. "Did you leave someone waiting too?" she asked with the brutal frankness only children possess. The question hit Noah like a punch. How could he answer that? How could he explain to a child the selfish choices adults make, the dreams they pursue at others' expense, the promises they break believing they'll have time to fix them later? "Yes," he finally admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "And it was the biggest mistake of my life." Emily nodded, taking it all in with a seriousness that went beyond her age. "Mum says everyone makes mistakes, even adults. The important thing is to apologize for real." A sad smile formed on Noah's lips. There was a wisdom in those simple words that made all his success, his entire corporate empire, seem small and insignificant by comparison. "Your mum is very wise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Just then, an announcement sounded over the loudspeaker, informing passengers about a flight that had just landed. Emily looked hopefully toward the arrivals area, her hope renewed as it was every single day. Noah watched that persistent hope with a knot in his throat. How many days had this child, possibly his child, waited for someone she believed would return? How many daily disappointments had she endured with such silent determination? Guilt now blended with something more complex, a burning desire to be the one she was waiting for, to deserve that kind of devotion. Somehow, this child had achieved what no board of directors, no competitor, no corporate challenge ever had. She had cracked the emotional armor of the powerful CEO Noah Parker. "Emily," he said softly, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Are you going to be here again tomorrow?" "Every day," she replied, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I never know when my dad might arrive." Noah nodded, standing up from the bench. He needed time to process what he'd learned, to decide what to do with this revelation that had turned his world upside down. "Then maybe I'll see you tomorrow," he said, with an implicit promise in his voice that didn't go unnoticed by the girl. Emily smiled, and in that smile, Noah saw something hauntingly familiar. The same shape of the eyes, the way she tilted her head slightly to the side, details that, now that he noticed, seemed to shout a truth he could no longer ignore. As he walked away, feeling the weight of his discovery, Noah knew his life had been irrevocably changed. All his plans, all the carefully laid strategies for the next phase of his career, suddenly seemed empty compared to the simple truth he had just uncovered. He had left Grace years ago, choosing ambition over love, success over family. And now the universe was presenting him with the consequence of that choice in the most unexpected way. A small girl in a red coat, patiently waiting at an airport for the father who never knew she existed. Noah arrived home late that night. His penthouse apartment, with its panoramic view of the city, felt strangely empty. A vast space filled with expensive furniture and professionally curated artwork, all perfect and flawless and utterly lifeless. He tossed his Italian leather briefcase onto the marble counter and poured himself a whiskey. Even the 12-year-old liquor couldn't calm the storm inside him. The image of that photograph wouldn't leave his mind. Grace. And Emily, that observant child with unshakable hope. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that dominated one wall, looking out at the city lights below. He had worked tirelessly to achieve all this. Every decision, every sacrifice, every relationship left behind, justified by the success he achieved. At 38, Noah Parker was the youngest CEO in the tech industry to run a company of that caliber. Business magazines called him a visionary, a strategic genius. But that night, standing before that window with Grace's face burning in his memory, those titles felt empty. "Emily," he murmured at his own reflection, distorted by the city lights. Could she really be my daughter? The possibility was terrifying and, at the same time, oddly comforting. As if a missing piece he hadn't even known was lost had suddenly appeared, offering a chance to complete a long-abandoned puzzle. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Mark, his vice president, with some crisis needing immediate attention. Something about the contracts for the new branch. Noah answered automatically, his mind switching to executive mode out of habit. But as he discussed clauses and percentages, his thoughts kept drifting back to the airport, to Emily, to Grace. The board meeting the next morning dragged on endlessly. Graphs, projections, reports, all blurred before Noah's eyes. Usually he would dominate these discussions with surgical precision, but today he seemed distant, almost uninterested. Noah, do you agree with the strategy for next quarter? The voice of the board's chairman brought him back to the room. Yes, of course, he replied automatically, not even remembering the discussion of the last 10 minutes. His mind was at the airport, with Emily, with the possibilities and consequences of his past choices. After the meeting, locked in his office, Noah couldn't focus on work. Memories came in waves, as though a long-sealed gate had been thrown open. Grace at 23, her hair blowing in the wind, laughing as they strolled through a park on their first date. Grace quietly crying at the airport when he left, promising to return in a year. Their early video calls, so full of excitement, plans, and promises. The calls growing shorter, more spaced out as his career skyrocketed. The last conversation, when he finally admitted he wouldn't be back soon, that the opportunity was too big, that he needed more time. Grace's expression, a mix of disappointment and resignation, still haunted him. And then, silence. The cowardice of letting time and distance do the dirty work of ending a relationship. He lacked the courage to officially break off. Noah loosened his tie, feeling suffocated by these memories. How could he have been so cruel? How could he have moved on without looking back, building his empire on the rubble of broken promises? Mr. Parker, your next appointment is waiting, his assistant announced over the intercom. Cancel it, Noah replied, surprising even himself. Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day. Ignoring the shock in his assistant's voice, Noah grabbed his personal cell phone, not the company phone, and did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for Grace Wilson online. Several results showed up, of course. But after a few attempts, refining the search to include teacher and literature, he found what he was looking for: Grace Wilson, literature teacher at Milton Heights High School. The photo on the school's website left no doubt. It was her, a few years older than in Emily's rumpled picture, but unmistakably Grace. Noah felt his heart pound. A school, an address. A concrete clue. In the days that followed, Noah felt torn between two worlds. At the office, he remained the unyielding CEO, focused on finalizing the massive deal for the new branch. But his evenings were now devoted to a private investigation. The internet revealed more about the life Grace had built after him. Mentions in local newspapers for reading incentive projects. A low-key professional profile. No active social media. Grace had never liked too much exposure. There was no mention of Emily, which made sense. Grace had always been private, and with a daughter, she was likely even more cautious. Noah found himself passing through the airport more often than necessary. Sometimes he only watched Emily from a distance, still not ready to approach Grace directly. Other times, he would sit with the girl for a few minutes, chatting about simple things: school, books, cartoons, safe topics that wouldn't raise suspicion. In one of those conversations, Emily casually mentioned where she lived. "It's a blue house near Westfield Park," she said, swinging her feet in the air. "There's a big tree out front where Mom hung a swing for me." Noah stored that information like a precious treasure. Later, driving by himself, something he rarely did, he found the house. A modest, well-kept home with faded blue paint and, just as Emily had described, a large tree with a simple swing. So different from his luxurious apartment, yet so much more inviting. He parked across the street, just watching. What right did he have to appear in their lives like this after so long? What chaos would he cause if he suddenly showed up, claiming a place he had abandoned of his own free will? At the same time, if Emily was his daughter, and each new detail convinced him further of that, didn't he have a responsibility? Not just financially, but moral and emotional. The conflict consumed him. Every board meeting, every multi-million-dollar negotiation that once energized him now felt like an annoying distraction. The empire he had built, which had been the center of his existence for so long, suddenly felt like a consolation prize for everything he had lost. One evening, sitting in his glass-walled office on the top floor of the Tech Vision building, Noah stared out at the illuminated city below. He had reached the top, exactly where he'd always dreamed of being. He commanded thousands of employees, making decisions that moved billions in the market. And still, he had never felt so empty, so incomplete. The portrait of his success was just a shiny facade, hiding the failure of the man he really was. A man who had abandoned the woman he loved, who didn't even know he had a daughter waiting for him faithfully every day. That night, Noah made a decision. It wasn't enough to simply observe from afar, to gather information in casual conversations. He needed to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He needed to speak with Grace. Leaving his suit jacket draped over his chair, a symbolic gesture of temporarily casting aside his mantle of power, Noah left the office. It was time to find out if there was still a chance to fix what he had broken so many years ago. The decision was made, but carrying it out was another story. Noah spent 3 days planning what he would say to Grace. He imagined every possible scenario, every reaction, every word. That's how he ran his company, by anticipating all outcomes, preparing for every eventuality. But this was different. This was personal. And Noah Parker hadn't dealt with personal matters in a very long time. On a Thursday afternoon, after cancelling a video conference with European investors, unthinkable just weeks ago, Noah drove himself to the neighborhood where Grace and Emily lived. He had left his executive attire at home, opting for jeans and a simple shirt. He didn't want to appear as the imposing CEO from magazine covers. He just wanted to be Noah, though he wasn't sure he remembered who that was anymore. The neighborhood was peaceful, full of trees, with modest but well-maintained houses. Children rode bikes on the sidewalk. An elderly man walked his dog. A woman watered her garden. A simple, real life, so different from the gleaming towers of steel and glass where Noah spent his days. He parked a few yards from the blue house with the large tree. His heart pounded so loudly that he could hear it in his ears. The last time he had felt so afraid was when? Maybe never. In the corporate world, he feared nothing. But here, faced with the possibility of seeing Grace again, of confronting his past mistakes, Noah was terrified. "Come on," he murmured to himself, stepping out of the car. "You face down boardrooms every day. You can face this." But each step toward that faded blue door felt harder than the last. The stone path in the yard, the swing on the big tree moving softly in the afternoon breeze, the colorful curtains in the windows, each detail told a story of a life that had happened without him, despite him. On the porch, Noah paused. This was his last chance to turn back, to return to his safe world of spreadsheets and contracts, where everything was predictable and controllable. But the image of Emily sitting at the airport, faithfully waiting for a father who didn't know she existed, wouldn't let him retreat. He took a deep breath and knocked softly on the door. The seconds that followed felt like an eternity. Footsteps inside the house, a woman's voice saying something inaudible. Then the door opened. Time stopped. Grace stood there, right in front of him, after all these years. More mature than in his memories, faint lines around her eyes, a few grey strands in her brown hair. But it was still her, still Grace, with those eyes that always seemed to see right through him, even into parts of himself he couldn't see. The shock on her face when she recognized him struck Noah like a punch to the gut. She turned pale, gripping the edge of the door as though she needed support. For an instant, no one spoke. Past, present, and all the possibilities of the future hovered in the air between them. "Noah." Grace's voice was soft, almost a whisper, as though seeing a ghost. "Hello, Grace," he managed. his own voice unfamiliar to his ears. The initial shock quickly gave way to something harder, more guarded. Grace straightened, lifting her chin. Her eyes, wide with surprise a moment ago, now studied him with cool detachment. "What are you doing here after all these years?" she asked, each word charged with a decade of suppressed hurt. "I've seen your face in business magazines, the great CEO. Is Tech Vision in trouble? Do you need a literature teacher to handle some corporate crisis?" The biting irony was so unlike the sweet, optimistic Grace he remembered. She had always seen the best in people, but he deserved every bit of her resentment. "No, it's nothing like that," Noah tried to explain, feeling disarmed. None of his prepared speeches felt right now. I met Emily at the airport." The mention of her daughter's name made Grace freeze. Her eyes narrowed, not just cold, but alarmed. "What did you say?" "Emily," Noah repeated gently. "She sits in the airport every afternoon. We've talked a few times over the past weeks." Grace grew even paler, holding onto the door frame. For a moment, Noah thought she might faint. "You spoke to her?" Grace's voice trembled slightly. "What did you say to her? What did she say to you?" Noah sensed the fear in Grace's eyes, a deep, visceral fear. A mother protecting her child. "Nothing major," he rushed to clarify. "Just casual conversation. She showed me a picture of you." He hesitated, gathering the courage to ask what had consumed him for days. "Grace, why is she at the airport every day?" The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken pain and secrets. Grace didn't answer. Tears shimmered in her eyes, which were now fixed on a spot beyond Noah's shoulder, as though she couldn't bring herself to look at him. "Grace," Noah pressed, his voice almost pleading. "Emily, is she—" "Stay away from her," Grace cut in, turning to meet his gaze with an intensity that made him step back. "I don't know what you're after now, after all this time, but leave my daughter out of it. She's been through enough." She emphasized "my" in a way that made it clear Emily was hers alone, a family she'd built without him. "I only want to understand," Noah pleaded, feeling lost. If I'm like Grace, I have the right to know." A bitter smile twisted Grace's lips. "Right," she repeated, letting out a harsh laugh. "You lost any right the moment you decided your precious future as a CEO mattered more than us, more than me." Her words hit Noah like a slap. He couldn't deny the truth in them. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice wavering. "Terrible mistakes. But if Emily is my daughter—" "Go away, Noah," Grace interrupted, her voice now tired. "Go away before she gets home from school. She doesn't need this. She doesn't need you popping in and out of her life like you did with mine." Noah felt panic rising. He was losing control of the situation, something he wasn't used to. "I won't disappear," he declared, more confidently than he felt. "Not this time. If Emily is my daughter, I want to be part of her life. I want to do things right." Grace studied him for a long moment, as if evaluating his sincerity. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "You want to be in her life now that it's convenient for you," she said quietly. "Now that you've built your empire and gotten everything you wanted, now you have time for a family, for a daughter." Each word was painful because it was true. "It's too late, Noah," Grace went on, her voice softer now, almost compassionate. "Live your life. Let us live ours." Before Noah could respond, she stepped back inside. "Please, don't come back," Grace pleaded, already starting to close the door. "And don't talk to Emily at the airport anymore. She's already waiting for someone who never comes. I don't want her getting attached to you, too." The door clicked shut with gentle finality, leaving Noah standing motionless on the porch, carrying the weight of a decade of wrong choices on his shoulders. Through the window, he caught a slight movement of the curtain, Grace watching to make sure he left. Slowly, Noah walked back to his car. The short journey felt infinitely longer going back than arriving, each step burdened by rejection, unanswered questions, and squandered possibilities. In the car, he didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, staring at the blue house with the big tree and the gently swaying swing, a house that could have been his home, had he made different choices. Grace had neither confirmed nor denied that Emily was his daughter, but her reaction, her fear, her fierce protectiveness said more than words could. Now Noah had more questions than answers. One thing, however, he knew for sure. He couldn't simply walk away, not again, not this time. 3 days passed since the confrontation at Grace's house. 3 days in which Noah could barely focus on work. The rejection, the closed door, the unanswered questions, all churned in his mind like a relentless storm. "Are you all right, sir?" his assistant asked, after noticing him gazing out the office window for almost 10 minutes, ignoring several important documents on his desk. "I'm fine," Noah replied automatically, though he was far from it. The morning dragged on in a series of meetings where Noah was physically present but mentally absent. His thoughts kept circling back to Grace, to Emily, to the life he might have had. It was as if, after years operating like a perfectly calibrated machine, something essential had broken inside him. At 2 in the afternoon, Noah did something he had never done in his entire career. "Cancel my commitments for the rest of the day," he told his assistant, who looked at him as though he had just announced his resignation. "All of them. But sir, there's a video conference with Tokyo to finalize details for the new branch." "Reschedule. Mark can handle it today." Ignoring the stunned expression on her face, Noah grabbed his jacket and left. He had no concrete plan, just a near physical need to escape that corporate tower, that world that suddenly felt so artificial and suffocating. Without much thought, he drove to Grace's neighborhood again, not to knock on her door. He knew he wasn't welcome, just to do what? He couldn't explain it even to himself. It was as though something drew him there, as though the answers he sought might be hidden among those tree-lined streets and modest houses. Noah parked several blocks away from the blue house. He walked without a defined route, just taking in the neighborhood atmosphere. Children returning from school, people walking their dogs, the unhurried pace of ordinary life, a life he had discarded in the name of ambition. Without realizing it, he came upon a small park, a modest green area with a few benches, shaded by large trees, and a simple playground where a few children played under the watchful eyes of mothers and babysitters. And there she was, Emily, alone on a swing, pumping her legs in an attempt to go higher. She wore a simple school uniform, her hair in a single braid instead of the uneven pigtails she wore at the airport. Focused on her personal battle with the swing, she didn't notice Noah at first. His heart pounded. Should he leave? Grace had made it clear she didn't want him near her daughter. Yet seeing Emily there, so close, doing something as innocently childlike as playing on a swing, stirred an emotion in Noah he couldn't name. Without fully deciding, he walked to a nearby bench and sat down. From there, he could watch Emily without drawing too much attention. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while sending discreet glances in her direction. Emily kept on with her solitary battle against the swing, furrowing her brow each time she tried to gain more height. There was something so determined, so resilient in that little figure, that Noah couldn't help smiling. Could that determination be a trait she inherited from him? As if sensing she was being watched, Emily suddenly looked toward the bench. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Noah," she called, jumping off the swing even while it was still in motion, and running over to him. Noah quickly tucked his phone away, surprised by the spontaneity with which Emily approached him. There was no trace of hesitation or excessive shyness, just a simple, genuine joy at seeing a familiar face. "Hi, Emily," he said, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and happiness. "What a coincidence seeing you here." Emily stopped in front of him, smiling shyly now. Up close, Noah noticed more details that felt familiar. The shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head slightly when curious. "Do you live around here?" she asked, shifting from foot to foot. "No, I was just taking a walk," Noah said, feeling strangely awkward. Negotiating billion-dollar contracts was easier than making casual conversation with a child. His child, possibly. "Do you want to play with me on the swing?" Emily invited, with the natural generosity of children. "I was trying to go really high, but it's hard by myself." The simplicity of her request caught Noah off guard. When was the last time anyone had invited him to play? When was the last time he had done something simply for fun, with no strategic goal attached? "Sure," he answered, standing up from the bench. "Though it's been a long time since I was on a swing. I might be a little rusty." Emily laughed as though he'd said the funniest thing in the world. People don't get rusty, Mr. Noah. Only metal things do. Noah smiled, following her to the playground. He felt conspicuously out of place, an adult in an expensive outfit, stepping into a space clearly meant for children and their caretakers. But Emily's beaming smile was worth any discomfort. "You have to sit down and I'll push," she explained seriously, as though instructing him in a highly complex procedure. "Then we switch." Noah complied, lowering himself onto a swing that was definitely too small for an adult. He felt oversized and awkward, yet surprisingly free. Emily positioned herself behind him and pushed with all the force her little arms could muster. "You're so heavy," she exclaimed, giggling at the effort. "I think I'm too big for this," Noah agreed, helping with his feet so she wouldn't be disappointed. After a few attempts, they traded places. With Emily on the swing, Noah gently pushed her, letting her go higher than she could manage alone, but still keeping it safe. Her shouts of joy each time she rose a bit further sparked an emotion in him he hadn't felt in years. Pure happiness, uncomplicated by anything else. "Higher, Mr. Noah," Emily pleaded, laughing. After the swing, Emily showed him her secret hiding spot, a space between two shrubs where she kept a few colorful stones and special leaves. She also demonstrated how she could hop 3 times in a row on the hopscotch court without a single misstep, a skill she claimed no one else in her class possessed. The simplicity of that moment, the ease with which Emily welcomed him into her little world, left Noah stunned. How could he connect so quickly, so deeply, with someone he barely knew? Yet at the same time, she wasn't truly a stranger. She was, very possibly, his own daughter. "Do you like ice cream, Mr. Noah?" Emily asked, eyeing a small ice cream cart that had just arrived at the park with the hopeful look only children can master. "Yes, I do," Noah responded. "What's your favorite flavor?" "Chocolate," she replied without hesitation. "Mom says I'm addicted to chocolate, just like my dad." The casual mention hit Noah like a punch. He had always loved chocolate. Coincidence or yet another clue? They bought ice cream and sat on a bench together. Emily chattered on about her school, her friends, her favorite stories, precious fragments of her life that Noah soaked up like a parched man finally finding water. "Mom's going to be home from work soon," Emily noted, glancing at the small digital watch on her wrist, a simple kid's model, so different from the Rolex Noah wore. "I have to get home before she worries." Noah felt both relief and disappointment. The encounter was ending, but it was probably for the best. He didn't want another clash with Grace. "I had a great time seeing you today, Emily," he said, more sincere than he'd been in his adult life. "Will you come here tomorrow too?" she asked, with a hope that made his heart ache. He hesitated. Should he promise something he might not keep? Wouldn't that just repeat the cycle of disappointments? "I'll try," he finally answered. "I have a lot of meetings, but I'll do my best." The smile she gave him made any meeting, any business, any corporate responsibility seem insignificant by comparison. As he watched Emily sprint toward the park exit, waving one last time before disappearing around the corner, Noah felt something both terrifying and wonderful. In just 1 hour of simple conversation and child's play, that girl had seized a place in his heart greater than any professional success he had ever achieved. And that realization scared him more than anything he had faced in the corporate world. The chance encounter in the park changed something fundamental within Noah. Returning to the office the next day, he found that the priorities which had guided him for so many years now seemed strangely hollow. He looked at his busy schedule and, for the first time, did not see achievements and opportunities but obstacles separating him from what really mattered. "I want you to reorganize my schedule for the next few weeks," he told his stunned assistant. "Nothing after 3 in the afternoon unless it's absolutely crucial for the new branch launch, Mr. Parker, that's unusual," she replied carefully. "We have investors who wait months for just 15 minutes of your time." "Then they'll have to wait a bit longer," Noah answered decisively, "or they can speak to Mark. It's time he took on more responsibilities." The news spread quickly through the company. The workaholic CEO, normally first in and last out, was now leaving the office religiously at 3 o'clock. Speculation ran wild. Some said health issues, others suspected a secret love affair. No one guessed the truth, that Noah Parker, the man who built an empire by prioritizing work over all else, was now structuring his life around near-daily chance encounters with a little girl in a neighborhood park. On the second day after the initial park meeting, Noah returned at the same time. His heart raced when he spotted Emily on the swing again, as though she had been waiting there for him. The genuine smile illuminating her face when she saw him caused a strange mix of joy and sorrow to surge within him. "You came!" she exclaimed, running to him. "I thought you'd be busy with your important meetings." "I found some free time," Noah replied, feeling an odd sense of pride for living up to his promise. That afternoon, they built a fort out of fallen branches and dried leaves. Noah, who led teams of brilliant engineers and renowned architects in constructing the new international branch, now followed orders from a small commander who insisted the door face west to keep out the monsters. The next day, he brought a small book he had bought especially for Emily, after discovering her love of adventure stories. Her eyes lit up with such excitement upon receiving it that Noah felt a lump in his throat. "No one's ever given me a book before except Mom," she said, leafing through the colorful pages with reverence. "Thank you, Mr. Noah." A pattern emerged. Nearly daily visits to the park, always maintaining the facade of a coincidental meeting, always ending before Grace might appear. Every day, Noah learned something new about Emily. Her favorite ice cream flavor, chocolate with cookie chunks. Her favorite color, red, like my coat at the airport. Her dream of having a dog. Mom says our yard is too small. Her favorite teacher, Mrs. Martinez, because she does different voices for every character when reading stories. In return, Noah shared little fragments of his own childhood, stories he hadn't told in so long he'd almost forgotten them, like how he used to build paper airplanes that could fly surprisingly far, how he invented a secret code with his best friend to exchange messages no one else understood, how he loved chocolate just as much as she did. "Just like my dad," Emily said at one point, so confidently that Noah almost confessed everything right then. But he couldn't. Not without talking to Grace first, not without being absolutely certain. Weeks passed, and the change in Noah ran deeper. Meetings he once deemed indispensable were now delegated without hesitation. Reports he once read meticulously were given only a quick glance. His mind often drifted to the park, even when his body remained in the conference room. "What's going on with you?" Mark asked one day, after a video conference where Noah had been noticeably distracted. "Just a few months ago, you were obsessed with this international expansion, and now you barely pay attention to the details." "I'm delegating more," Noah replied vaguely, trusting the team more. In truth, it was more complex. For the first time since leaving Grace, Noah was questioning the choices that had guided him for so long. The success he had once pursued with such determination suddenly seemed like a consolation prize compared to what truly mattered. On a particularly sunny afternoon, 3 weeks after the first park meeting, Noah and Emily sat under the shade of a large tree. She had brought her collection of colorful stones to show him, explaining with earnestness the story behind each one, where she found it, why it was special, what magical powers it possessed. "This is the most important of all," she said, holding up a common stone that was slightly bluish. "I found it on Mom's birthday. I told her it was a present from the fairies." Noah smiled, charmed by the girl's imagination. "Did your mom believe you?" "Of course," Emily said, as though it were obvious. "Mom always believes in me. It's just the two of us. You know, we have to believe in each other." The simplicity of that statement hit Noah deeply. He pictured Grace raising Emily alone, building a small but solid world just for the two of them, and his heart twisted. "Do you ever miss other people in your family?" he asked carefully. Emily grew serious, gently placing the bluish stone back in her collection. "Sometimes I miss my dad," she said quietly, as though sharing a secret. "But I can't tell Mom that. It makes her sad." Noah's throat tightened. "Does your mom talk about him?" Emily nodded, a hopeful glow in her eyes. "She told me he's really smart and works with computers, that he had to go on a big trip before I was born, really far away." The girl looked at the sky as if she could see beyond the clouds. Mom says he doesn't know I exist, but one day he'll come back, and when he finds out about me, he'll love me so much. Noah struggled to hold back his tears. The story Grace had woven to protect Emily, to give her hope instead of abandonment, was both beautiful and devastating. "Is that why you go to the airport every day?" he asked softly. Emily nodded. "Mom says he could come back at any moment. I want to be there when it happens." She smiled with a confidence that broke Noah's heart. "I think I'll recognize him right away. Mom says we look alike." "You've never met your dad?" Noah asked, though he already knew the answer. "Never," Emily replied, with no apparent sadness, only acceptance. "But that's okay. Mom says he took a big trip, and one day he'll be back. I'm just waiting for that day." The pain Noah felt at that moment was physical, as if something inside him were being torn apart. The reality of what he had done hit him with brutal clarity. He hadn't just abandoned Grace. He had abandoned this wonderful little girl, who now waited faithfully every day for a man who had no idea he should return. His ambition, his obsession with success, his single-minded focus on building tech vision had taken him so far from what truly mattered that now, sitting on the grass of a simple park, he barely recognized the man he had become. "What if," Noah began, choosing his words carefully, "what if your dad didn't know you were waiting? What if he got lost on his way back?" Emily considered this with seriousness. "Mum says sometimes people get lost in their own lives," she replied with a wisdom beyond her years. "They forget how to find their way home. But if the love is real, they always find their way back." Noah swallowed hard, unable to reply. How could he explain to a child that sometimes people make terrible, deliberate choices? That sometimes what seems important at the time, power, money, status, overshadows what truly matters? "Do you think people who make big mistakes can be forgiven?" he finally asked. Emily smiled, as if the answer were the simplest thing in the world. "Mom says it doesn't matter how big the mistake is. What matters is how big the regret is. If the person truly regrets it, they deserve a second chance." The simplicity of that childlike logic carried a truth so profound that Noah felt tears well up again. A second chance. Was that what he wanted? And was it what he deserved? "Are you sad, mister?" "Noah," Emily asked, noticing his emotion. "No," he said, quickly wiping his eyes. "I'm just thinking about how smart you are. Your mum must be so proud of you." Emily smiled, but her face grew serious again. "Don't tell Mom I talked about my dad," she requested, worried. "It's kind of a secret between me and her. She doesn't like talking about it with other people." "I won't tell," Noah promised, a promise he was determined to keep this time. As they left the park, Emily holding his hand with a trust he knew he didn't deserve, Noah realized he'd reached a point of no return. He couldn't go back to his old life, pretending Emily and Grace didn't exist. He couldn't continue these secret meetings forever, living in the shadows of their lives. He had to do something. He had to fix what he had broken, if it could still be fixed. What he didn't know was that, at a distance, partially concealed behind a tree, Grace was watching, her heart torn between fear and something perilously close to hope. Late afternoon visits to the park became the center of Noah's life. The man who once lived for board meetings and million-dollar negotiations now counted down the hours until he could leave the office to see Emily in her simple games and conversations. One sunny Tuesday, they were playing a makeshift chess game on the ground with rocks and leaves representing the pieces. Noah had taught Emily the basics the week before, surprised at how quickly she learned. "Check," Emily announced proudly, moving a larger rock that acted as her rook. Noah studied the improvised board with mock seriousness, as if facing a real challenge. In truth, he was more interested in observing Emily. She furrowed her brow when concentrating, creating a slight wrinkle between her eyebrows, just like him. "You look very serious when you're thinking," Noah commented casually. Emily didn't even glance up from the board. "Mom says I look like a scientist working on a tough experiment," she replied, still planning her next moves. "She says I frown just like my dad did." The casual remark made Noah freeze for a moment. This was the first time Emily spontaneously mentioned a specific similarity to the father she'd never met. He glanced at a distorted reflection of himself in a nearby puddle. He indeed had the same frown line on his forehead right then. "Checkmate," Emily exclaimed, taking advantage of his distraction to corner his king. She threw her head back, laughing in victory, and that laugh, a bit low, starting quiet and building, sounded so familiar it gave Noah chills. He'd heard that same laugh in recordings of his interviews, in corporate videos, in speeches to investors. It was his own laugh, reflected in that child. "You let me win," she accused, still smiling. "Never," Noah protested, feigning indignation. "You won fair and square. You have an impressive strategic mind." Emily lifted her chin slightly, proud of the praise. The subtle gesture was yet another mirror. Noah did the exact same thing when receiving praise he felt he'd earned, not with false modesty, but with a calm acceptance of his own ability. These details were so subtle, so ingrained in unconscious mannerisms, they couldn't be learned or imitated. They were inherited, passed along in genes along with eye color and hand shape. That same afternoon, as they enjoyed ice cream on a park bench, Noah noticed Emily's eyes weren't simply brown as he'd first assumed. They were a peculiar shade of hazel, brownish-green with a golden ring around the pupil, exactly like his own. Her distinctive trait that journalists had even mentioned in profiles about him, poetically describing them as amber eyes. "You really do love chocolate, huh?" he remarked, watching her demolish her ice cream with gusto. "It's the best flavor in the world," she replied firmly. "Mom says that when I was a baby, my first word wasn't mama or dada, it was choco." Noah laughed, recalling a story his own mother used to tell, about how his obsession with chocolate started so early he tried to steal candy bars from the pantry before he could even walk. With every small revelation, every shared mannerism, every similarity in taste, it was as though puzzle pieces were falling into place, forming an image he both feared and longed to see completed. "You two seem to be having fun," came a gentle voice from nearby. Noah looked up to see an elderly lady smiling at them. She was a familiar sight in the park, white hair in a bun, often seen feeding the pigeons and chatting with children and parents. "Mrs. Rosa," Emily called happily. "Look, I'm having chocolate ice cream." "I see that, dear," replied the older woman, seating herself on the bench next to them. "And it looks delicious." The woman looked from Emily to Noah, then back to Emily, with that calm, direct observation older people sometimes have. "You know," she said casually, "you two could be father and daughter. You have the same determined look." The comment, made without any intention beyond a friendly observation, struck Noah like a thunderbolt. It was the first time anyone else had vocalized what he had been increasingly sure of. Emily just smiled, oblivious to the sudden tension that gripped Noah. "Mr. Noah is my friend from the airport," she explained to Mrs. Rosa. "He tells me stories about airplanes and faraway places." Mrs. Rosa nodded, as though that explained everything. "Friendships across generations are precious," she said, standing up. "Well, I'll go feed my feathered friends now. You two have a nice afternoon." Noah managed only a tight nod. His heart was racing, and he felt a slight sweat on his forehead despite the cool breeze. "Are you okay, Mr. Noah?" Emily asked, noticing his sudden shift. "Your ice cream's melting." "I'm fine," he replied quickly, trying to steady himself. "I just remembered something important I have to take care of." Emily examined him with her hazel eyes, his eyes, and for a dreadful moment, Noah wondered if she was starting to notice their similarities too. "You look scared," she observed with childlike candor. "Like when my mum saw a big spider in the bathroom." Noah forced a laugh, hoping to dispel the tension. "It's nothing as scary as a spider, I promise." He took a deep breath, trying to change the subject. "So, tell me more about your science project." Emily launched into an enthusiastic explanation of how she was growing beans in cotton balls for her science class. Noah did his best to appear completely engrossed, though his mind was elsewhere. Mrs. Rosa had seen in minutes what had been right in front of him for weeks. It wasn't just coincidences or his imagination seeking connections. The evidence was real, tangible, impossible to ignore. The way Emily furrowed her brow when concentrating, the distinct laugh that started low and built, the slight tilt of her chin when receiving praise, her nearly stubborn determination in the face of challenges, her obsession with chocolate, And those eyes, hazel brown with a golden ring, so unusual they always drew attention. There was no denying the growing certainty. Emily was not just Grace's daughter, she was his daughter. And somehow, he had to find out why Grace never told him about the pregnancy, why she created a story about a faraway father who would someday return, why she let Emily wait at the airport day after day for someone who didn't even know he needed to come back. Watching Emily lick the last traces of chocolate from her spoon, with that intense concentration so much like his own, Noah knew it was time for the truth. He couldn't continue these secret encounters, these stolen moments. He had to confront Grace, demand answers, offer... What? Apologies? Compensation? A lifetime of absence couldn't be erased with words or money. But one thing was certain, he would not run away this time. He would not abandon Emily again, even if she didn't know she had already been abandoned once. "What are you thinking, Mr. Noah?" Emily asked, snapping him out of his thoughts. "You have that concentrating face again, the one that looks like mine. Just like yours," Noah repeated softly. "I'm thinking I need to resolve some important things, Emily. Things I left unfinished for far too long." And for the first time since he'd left Grace years ago, Noah Parker felt ready to face the consequences of his actions. Night was falling when Noah made up his mind. He had spent the last few hours pacing his penthouse like a caged animal. The older woman's words in the park still echoed in his mind. "You two could be father and daughter. You have the same determined look." These were no longer just coincidences. Every piece of evidence fit together, forming a picture he could not ignore. Emily's eyes, so much like his own. The way she furrowed her brow in concentration, the peculiar laugh, the tilt of her chin, the love of chocolate, the determination, and above all, the timeline. He had left Grace almost 7 years ago, and Emily seemed about 6. Noah picked up his phone to call his driver, but paused. No, he wasn't going to show up in his executive car with a uniformed chauffeur. This wasn't the time for power moves or status symbols. It was a moment of truth, of humility. Perhaps the first time in years he'd faced something without the armor of his professional success. He dressed simply, jeans, a t-shirt, and a light jacket. No ties, no expensive watches, nothing that screamed CEO. He took his own car from his building's garage, a model he rarely used. On the drive to Grace's neighborhood, his thoughts whirled. What would he say? How would she respond if his suspicions were confirmed? And what if he was wrong? Near the Blue House, he parked several blocks away. He preferred to walk the remaining distance, using the time to organize his thoughts. The evening air was cool, and the suburban streets were calm. Some families were finishing dinner, glimpsed through the lit windows, scenes of a normal life, a life he had traded for boardrooms and 5-star hotels. Grace's house was one of the few with lights still on. From the sidewalk out front, Noah could see through the living room window. Grace sat on the couch, seemingly grading papers. There was no sign of Emily, probably already asleep. He drew a deep breath and walked to the door. Each step felt laden with meaning, as though he was crossing not just a small front yard, but years of bad decisions and missed opportunities. He knocked gently, not wanting to startle anyone or wake Emily. He heard footsteps approaching, followed by Grace's cautious voice. "Who is it?" "It's me, Noah." Silence. For a moment, he thought she might ignore him entirely. Then he heard the lock turn, and the door opened slightly, with the security chain still in place. Grace's face appeared in the gap, her expression guarded and defensive. "What do you want?" "I asked you not to come back." Noah swallowed hard, recognizing in her gaze the same determination he'd seen in Emily, mother and daughter, protecting each other from a world that could hurt them, from a man who already had. "I need to talk to you, Grace. It's important." "I'm busy," she replied, starting to close the door. "Please," Noah pleaded, something he hadn't done in years. 5 minutes. It's about Emily." The mention of her daughter's name made Grace hesitate. She studied him for a moment, searching for signs of danger, then exhaled in resignation. She closed the door to remove the chain, reopening it. "Emily's asleep," she warned in a low voice, "and I want her to stay that way." We can talk on the porch. She stepped outside, quietly shutting the door behind her. On the small front porch, two simple chairs sat side by side. She took one, gesturing for Noah to take the other. The soft glow of a nearby street lamp partially lit their faces, creating an almost intimate atmosphere despite the tension. Noah sat, then immediately stood again, too restless to remain still. How to begin? How to put into words the suspicions, fears, and hopes swirling in his mind? "I've been seeing Emily at the park," he finally said. There was no point hiding it. "We meet almost every day these past few weeks." Grace didn't look surprised, only resigned. "I know. I saw you a few times." Now it was Noah's turn to be surprised. "You saw us and you never said anything, never interfered." Grace sighed, running a hand through her hair in a gesture that spoke of exhaustion. "What was I supposed to do? Yank my daughter away, start a scene in front of everyone?" She shook her head. "Emily told me about the nice airport friend she's been meeting at the park. She didn't mention your name, but it wasn't hard to figure out." Noah processed this, trying to understand what it implied. "So you allowed it?" "I didn't allow it," Grace answered firmly. "I observed from a distance. I wanted to see what you would do, what you'd tell her, whether you'd try to turn Emily against me or make big promises you couldn't keep." She paused, meeting his gaze. "But you didn't do any of that. You just played with her, talked to her, like a normal adult with a child." Noah couldn't tell if he should feel relieved or offended at her implied surprise. "I would never do anything to hurt Emily," he said with conviction. "She is—" The words caught in his throat. "She is what, Noah?" Grace pressed, challenging him to say aloud what both of them knew hovered between them. Noah took a deep breath, mustering courage. "Everything about her, the way she frowns when she's thinking, how she lifts her chin when she's praised, her laugh, her eyes." He gestured, as though trying to grab hold of these facts from the air. "Even her chocolate obsession. A lady at the park said we look like father and daughter." Grace remained silent, her face unreadable. Noah continued, unable to stop now. "And the dates. I left almost 7 years ago. Emily is probably 6, and the fact you've been telling her that her father works with computers, that he went on a long trip, that he'll come back someday." His voice broke. "Grace, I need to know the truth. I know I was wrong to choose my career over our love, to put my ambition to become a CEO above everything, but I need to know the truth about Emily." A heavy silence fell. The night breeze rustled the leaves, adding a soft hush to the tension. A dog barked in the distance. When Grace finally spoke, her voice was loaded with years of pent-up emotion. "What do you want me to say, Noah? That you abandoned not just a girlfriend, but an entire family? That while you were building your empire and gracing the covers of business magazines, I was dealing with morning sickness, ultrasounds, and sleepless nights alone? That I raised your daughter by telling her stories of a wonderful father who'd come back one day because it was better than telling her the truth? That he simply didn't care enough to stay?" Every word was like a knife, precisely stabbing Noah's most vulnerable spots. He flinched as if physically struck. "I didn't know," he murmured, voice barely audible. "How could I know? You never told me you were pregnant." Grace stood abruptly, her contained anger finally boiling over. "When exactly should I have told you? When you stopped answering my calls? When you changed your number? When you decided one message a month was all I deserved?" Her voice trembled with emotion. "Or maybe I should have shown up at your company, pregnant, causing a scandal for the rising star CEO." Noah felt the full weight of his past choices. Each unanswered call, each ignored message, each broken promise formed a wall now seeming insurmountable. "It wasn't all like that," he tried weakly. "In the beginning, I really meant to come back. We spoke every day, remember? We had planned—" "In the beginning," Grace repeated, her tone dangerously calm. "At the beginning of anything, fiancés are faithful. At the beginning, dictators promise prosperity. At the beginning, all fairy tales seem to have happy endings." She folded her arms protectively. "It's not beginnings that define people, Noah. It's the middles, the endings, the choices they make when the initial excitement fades." Noah ran his hands over his face. feeling the crushing weight of years of neglect. "You're right," he finally admitted. "I made terrible choices. I prioritized things that seemed important at the time: success, recognition, power, and I lost what truly mattered." He raised his eyes to meet hers, not hiding his vulnerability. "But I'm here now, trying to fix it, if that's still possible." Grace studied him for a long moment, as though trying to gauge his sincerity. "Why now?" "Because you found out Emily is probably your daughter. If she didn't exist, would you still be here trying to fix us?" The question hit Noah like a profound realization. Would he have sought Grace if Emily hadn't been part of the picture? The painful answer was probably no. He had moved on, built his life, seldom looking back except in rare moments of nostalgia. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but Emily does exist. And it seems she's my daughter." He paused, gathering courage for the final question. "Isn't she? Emily is my daughter, right?" Grace sank back into the chair, suddenly looking exhausted. When she spoke, her voice held no more anger, only painful resignation. "You really didn't realize? Emily is your daughter, Noah. By the time you left for your big trip to build your corporate empire, I was already pregnant, though I didn't know yet. When I found out, you'd already moved on without looking back, so I decided to move on too." Grace's confirmation hit Noah like a tidal wave. Even though he'd suspected it, even though he'd pieced together all the clues, hearing it spoken was entirely different. He braced himself against the wall, his legs feeling weak, devastated by the thought of how much he had missed, how many of his daughter's milestones he had sacrificed on the altar of ambition. "All those days at the airport," Noah whispered, voice cracking. "She was waiting for me." Grace nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks in silence. "Yes, she believes you'll come back someday, that when you learn about her, you'll love her the way she deserves. It's the one thing I've asked of you all these years, even though you didn't know it. When that moment came, that you wouldn't let her down like you let me down." Noah felt tears on his own cheeks. He hadn't cried in public since he was a teen, but he couldn't hold back now. 6 years. 6 years of first steps, first words, first days of school. 6 birthdays. 6 Christmases. An entire life of small moments, irretrievably lost. "I want to be part of her life," Noah said through tears, his voice both emotional and determined. "I want to know her, really know her, not just as the airport friend. I want her to know who I am." Grace watched him, her face etched with a mix of emotions. "And how do you think that's going to happen?" she asked, not with hostility but with a tiredness born of years fighting alone. "You're just going to show up tomorrow and say, 'Surprise, Emily, I'm your dad'? You'll promise to be around, then vanish when your next billion-dollar deal pops up. You'll want visitation rights on weekends, unless you're too busy closing contracts." Frustration flickered in Noah's eyes. For a moment, the CEO, accustomed to giving orders and having them carried out, threatened to emerge. "She's my daughter. I have the right—" "Right," Grace cut in, her voice turning icy. "Tell me about rights, Noah. Which of those did you exercise in the last 6 years? What responsibilities did you take on? What sacrifices did you make?" Her words were like a slap. Noah stepped back, recognizing their painful truth. "None," he admitted softly. "I didn't do any of that, but I want to start now." He stepped closer, pleading with his eyes. "Please, Grace, I want to tell her, tomorrow. I want to start fixing what I broke." Grace shook her head firmly. "No, Noah, you've only been back in our lives for a few weeks. I've raised Emily alone for 6 years. I will tell her when I think it's right. You need to respect that." Noah felt frustration rising. He was used to having control, setting terms, making things happen. The idea of waiting, abiding by someone else's rules, clashed with everything he had become. "But there is no but," Grace said curtly. "It's not just about regret. It's about you truly understanding the value of what you abandoned. All your money and power as a CEO can't buy back lost years, nor do they grant you the right to decide anything about her now." Grace softened her tone slightly, seeing genuine pain in his eyes. "Understand, Noah. Emily isn't a business deal you can acquire just because you decide it's now worthwhile. She's a person, a child with fragile feelings and huge hopes about the father she never met. If you walk in as her dad and then walk out again because you realize fatherhood demands more time and commitment than you're willing to give. She trailed off, letting the implication hang. Noah knew she was right. Frustration yielded to reluctant understanding. For the first time, he grasped that he couldn't simply act like a CEO in this situation. He couldn't force or buy his way to the result he wanted. "How long?" he asked finally. "How long until you tell her?" Grace contemplated his question. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I have to be sure you're really committed. That this isn't a passing phase of guilt or curiosity that fades when the novelty wears off. How can I prove that to you?" "Time," Grace said simply. "Consistency. Show me you can be dependable. That when you say you'll show up, you actually show up. That you won't disappear when work calls. That you're willing to make sacrifices for your daughter, like I've done for 6 years. Noah nodded slowly. It wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it was what he deserved. "Can I keep seeing her? At the park? At the airport?" Grace hesitated, weighing her decision. "Yes, but only as her friend, nothing more. And I want to know when and where you meet." Her gaze was steady. "And I want your word, Noah, that you won't drop even the slightest hint of who you really are until I say it's time." "You have my word," he promised solemnly. Silence settled between them again, but it was different now, less hostile, more contemplative. A distant siren broke the quiet of the night. "How did you manage?" Noah asked at last. "Raising a child alone, working, keeping everything going without any help." A sad smile crossed Grace's lips. "Not all forms of success make headlines, Noah. Some are measured in school lunches packed, in band-aids placed on scraped knees, in bedtime stories read at night." She gave a slight shrug. "I did what I had to do. The same way millions of single mothers do every day." Noah felt a new wave of admiration for the woman he once loved and then abandoned. While he had built a towering corporate empire, she had built something infinitely more precious, more lasting. "You're amazing," he said, with no trace of charm or manipulation, just simple truth. "And I regret every day that I didn't see that sooner." Grace didn't answer directly, but her expression softened a bit. "It's getting late," she said, standing. "I have lessons to plan, and Emily wakes up early." Noah took the hint. This chapter of their conversation was over. There was much more to say, but not tonight. He stood as well, feeling at once exhausted and oddly invigorated. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for telling me the truth, for not stopping me from seeing Emily. For," he hesitated, "for being strong enough to do everything I didn't." Grace nodded, accepting the long-overdue tribute. As Noah descended the porch steps, she called out one last time, "Noah." He turned. "Emily has a ballet recital next week, Thursday 5 in the afternoon at her school." Grace paused before continuing. "She'd be happy if her airport friend were there." Noah felt a lump in his throat. "I wouldn't miss it for anything," he promised, with a conviction he hadn't felt for any business meeting in years. As he walked back to his car, Noah bore the weight of a truth finally revealed. Emily was his daughter. He was a father, an absent, flawed one who'd lost irreplaceable years in pursuit of professional success. But he was also a father with a second chance, a chance to show up for the future, even if the past could never be reclaimed. He looked up at the night sky, dotted with stars he rarely noticed from his penthouse. The vastness overhead seemed to mirror the expansion of possibilities before him. Frightening, challenging, but infinitely more meaningful than any corporate triumph. That night, for the first time in years, Noah Parker wasn't just a CEO. He was a man facing his greatest challenge, learning how to be a father. The weeks following that conversation on the porch brought profound changes to Noah's life. For the first time since founding TechVision, the company was no longer the absolute center of his existence. His office, once occupied until late at night, now sat empty after 3 in the afternoon on most days. Meetings once considered unmissable were handed off to Mark and other executives. International trips, once a constant, were now carefully scrutinized for genuine necessity. "Are you all right, Mr. Parker?" his assistant asked one morning, after watching him decline a conference in Tokyo that could speed up the new branch's launch. "Are you sick?" "Never better, Lisa," Noah answered with a smile that only deepened her confusion. The truth was that Noah Parker, the unstoppable CEO who built a tech empire through absolute dedication, had found something else to dedicate himself to. Or rather, someone else. Per the agreement with Grace, Noah continued meeting Emily as the airport friend. They went to the park, ate ice cream, played improvised chess, and talked about books and dreams. Each moment was precious, each discovery about his daughter a gift. Each laugh, each look of admiration, each "see you tomorrow, Mr. Noah," a painful reminder of all the time he'd lost. TechVision's executives watched in astonishment as their leader transformed. Rumors circulated, undisclosed health issues, possibly a looming resignation, or maybe a hostile takeover. None guessed the real reason: a small girl with brown hair and hazel eyes who had melted the heart of the unyielding CEO. Grace noticed the changes too. In the first days following their revelation, she watched Noah with caution, bracing for the moment his initial enthusiasm would fade or a company crisis would make him vanish again. But weeks passed, and Noah stayed, consistent, present, reliable. If he said he'd be at the park by 4, he arrived at 3:45. If he promised to attend Emily's ballet class, he sat in the front row. If they scheduled ice cream after school, there were never any last-minute calls cancelling. One particularly telling afternoon, Noah appeared at a school music recital where Emily would play a simple piano piece. Mid-performance, an urgent call came in, the final contract for the international branch, which he'd been obsessing over for more than a year. Without hesitation, Noah silenced his phone and tucked it away, eyes fixed on his daughter who didn't yet know he was her father. Mark could handle it. Emily wouldn't have another first recital. It was this small gesture, noticed by Grace a few rows behind him, that finally melted the last layer of ice around her heart. The next morning, while Emily was at school, Grace phoned Noah. "I think it's time," she said simply. "Sunday afternoon. Can you come to our house?" Noah's heart pounded as he understood the significance of those words. At last, after weeks of acting as just a friend, he could be who he really was, Emily's father. "I'll be there," he promised, voice thick with emotion. Sunday dawned bright and sunny, as though the universe recognized the importance of the day. Noah had barely slept, torn between anxiety and anticipation. How would Emily react? Would she be happy? Disappointed? Confused? Angry? The possibilities tormented him. He arrived at Grace's house half an hour early. Too nervous to consider being fashionably late, he waited in his car, observing the blue house and imagining Emily inside, completely unaware that her life, like his, was about to change forever. Exactly at 3 in the afternoon, Noah walked up to the door. This was no ordinary visit. In many ways, it was the most important day of his life. Grace opened the door before he could knock. Her expression, usually guarded around him, now revealed a mix of nerves and cautious hope. "She's excited to see you," Grace said softly. "She said she has a new collection of stones to show you, her airport friend." Noah's chest tightened. In a few minutes, he wouldn't just be the airport friend. He would be her father, a title no professional accomplishment could ever match. The living room was cozy, furnished simply but well cared for, with photos of Emily everywhere. Emily as a baby, Emily on her first day of school, Emily in a Halloween costume. A whole life documented in images that he had not been part of. "Have a seat," Grace offered, gesturing to the couch. "I'll get Emily. She's in her room finishing a drawing." Noah nodded, unable to trust his own voice. While Grace left the room, he took in every detail. Children's books mixed with adult novels on the shelves. A small piano in the corner, perhaps where Emily practiced. Bright drawings stuck to the fridge, visible through the kitchen doorway. This was a home, in the truest sense of the word. Something his immaculate penthouse, for all its luxury, had never been. Grace returned a few minutes later, holding Emily's hand. The girl's face lit up when she saw Noah. "Mr. Noah, Mom didn't tell me you were coming, she said happily, clearly thrilled by the surprise. It's a special visit, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Grace guided Emily to the couch, sitting beside her. Noah remained standing, unsure, until Grace indicated a nearby armchair. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, creating golden beams that gave the moment a dreamlike quality. Emily, Grace began gently, holding her daughter's hand and looking into her eyes. You know how you've always been waiting for your dad to return from that long trip. The girl nodded, suddenly serious. Her gaze flickered between her mother and Noah, as though trying to piece together what was happening. Yes, Emily said, I wait every day at the airport. Grace took a deep breath. Noah could see how hard this was for her as well. Admitting the truth meant acknowledging years of a well-intentioned lie. At this point, there is a brief interruption in the original text. A outra campanha está chegando, which seems to be a mistaken or duplicated phrase in the Portuguese version. We'll adapt it smoothly to maintain clarity without changing the sequence of events. The doorbell rang at that moment, cutting Grace off. Emily and Noah both glanced toward the door, puzzled. Grace stood up. It's part of the surprise, she explained, going to open it. Mark was there, holding a large, colorful box. I got it, boss, just like you asked, he said, handing the box to Grace with a curious glance inside before leaving with a wave. Grace closed the door and returned to the sofa, placing the box next to Emily. Your dad came back, sweetheart, Grace continued, as though the interruption had always been planned. He's here. She indicated Noah with a gentle gesture. Emily looked at Noah, then at her mom, then back at Noah. Her eyes widened as realization slowly dawned, like puzzle pieces finally snapping into place in her young mind. You're my dad, she asked in a small voice, almost a whisper. The one Mom said was an important man with a big company. The world seemed to stand still at that moment. Noah felt the gravity of her question, the enormity of this revelation. Slowly, he knelt to her level, tears brimming in his eyes, and he didn't bother to hide them. Yes, Emily, I'm your dad, he answered, his voice shaky with emotion. And I'm so sorry it took me so long to come back. Emily remained silent, her expression a mixture of emotions so deep it almost hurt to witness. For a dreadful instant, Noah feared she might reject him, that 6 years of absence had created a chasm too wide to cross. Then, without warning, she lunged forward, throwing her arms around him with all the strength her small frame allowed. Noah hugged her back, tears now flowing freely. He could feel her heartbeat pounding against his chest, her quick breathing, the slight tremor in her body. I knew you'd come back, Emily murmured against his shoulder. I waited all this time at the airport. Mom said you'd come back one day. Over Emily's shoulder, Noah locked eyes with Grace. She too was crying, watching the scene with a mixture of emotion and relief. Emily's waiting had finally ended. The story Grace had woven to spare her daughter the pain of abandonment now had an unexpectedly happy outcome. We brought something for you, Grace said, opening the box that Mark had delivered. From inside, she pulled out a large teddy bear, almost as big as Emily, with a red bow around its neck, her favorite color. Your dad picked it out, Grace explained. He wanted you to have a special present for today. Emily accepted the bear, hugging it along with Noah, as though she couldn't decide which she loved more at that moment. Can I show my room to my dad? She asked, the word dad sounding perfectly natural on her lips, as though it had always been there, waiting for the right moment. Grace nodded, and Emily grabbed Noah's hand, tugging him eagerly with the vibrant energy of a child proud to reveal her world. As she led him around the house, excitedly pointing out every detail of her little realm, Noah realized he'd spent his whole life chasing the wrong kind of success. He'd built an empire but lost a kingdom far more precious, the formative years of his daughter, the growth of a love Grace had once offered so freely. Some mistakes couldn't be fully undone. The lost time could never be recovered. But maybe, just maybe, there was still room for a new beginning. A different path where success was measured not in acquisitions and profits, but in smiles, hugs, and shared moments. For the first time in his adult life, Noah Parker wasn't thinking about the future. in terms of strategic goals or 5-year plans. He was thinking only of the next minute, the next hour, the next day with his newly discovered daughter. And, surprisingly, that was more than enough. Silence filled the boardroom when Noah Parker finished his announcement. Effective immediately. I'll be cutting my workload by 50%. Mark will take on additional responsibilities as COO. Charles Whitman, the oldest board member, was the first to speak. Noah, we're at a critical phase with this new branch. This hardly seems like the right time to reduce your involvement. Noah smiled, something rare in those meetings. Charles, 6 weeks ago, I would have agreed with you. But I recently discovered I have a 6-year-old daughter, a daughter I never knew. She needs me more than this company ever did. Around the table, expressions ranged from shock to disbelief. Noah Parker, the workaholic who transformed Tech Vision into a tech powerhouse, was now talking about fatherhood as his priority. This isn't a negotiable decision, Noah continued. Tech Vision will continue to grow, but not at the expense of my family. Not anymore. As people began filing out, Mark approached Noah, still processing the news. Are you sure about this? We sacrificed a lot to get here. That's exactly the problem, Mark. I sacrificed things I never should have. Now I'm trying to fix that before it's too late. In the days that followed, Noah adjusted to a new routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he dropped Emily off at school. The first time was a minor disaster. He arrived too early, parked in the wrong spot and entered through the teacher's gate. But seeing Emily dash toward him, shouting, "Daddy!" outweighed any embarrassment. "This is my dad," she told her friends proudly, with a mixture of shyness and delight. "He works with computers. He took a long trip, but now he's back." The simplicity of that explanation, so close to what Grace had always told her, but now transformed into truth, never ceased to move Noah. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, he arrived punctually to pick her up. In the beginning, other moms stared with curiosity. The impeccably dressed executive looked out of place among the typical crowd, but as the weeks passed, the suits gave way to casual clothes, and his stiff posture became relaxed as he talked about homework and classroom antics. "Mr. Parker, could you help with the school's summer fair?" one of the teachers asked one afternoon. 5 years earlier, he would have written a check just to avoid participating. Now he replied, "Of course. You can count on me. And please, just call me Noah." Grace's dinner table, once the private domain of mother and daughter, now frequently seated Noah as well. Simple home-cooked meals that he appreciated far more than any Michelin-starred restaurant. Gradually, the three formed small traditions: pizza on Fridays, Sunday walks in the park, bedtime reading sessions. "You read differently from Mum," Emily remarked one night. "You do voices for all the characters." "Is that good or bad?" Noah asked, uncertain. Emily considered the question seriously. "It's just different. I like both ways." "Mum says different doesn't mean better or worse, just different." Noah nodded, appreciating how Grace's wisdom shone through in Emily's words. Not that everything was perfect. There were tense moments, boundaries tested. Noah, used to having absolute control at work, sometimes struggled to accept that when it came to family matters, his was just one opinion, often second to Grace's greater experience. Grace, for her part, wavered between gratitude at seeing her daughter's happiness and fear that Noah might revert to old habits whenever his career beckoned. "How do I know you won't vanish again when a major crisis hits the company?" she asked one night after Emily was asleep. "How do I know this isn't just the novelty of fatherhood?" Noah didn't answer right away. It was a fair question. "I can't prove something that hasn't happened yet," he finally said. "All I can do is show you, day after day, that my priorities have changed." "That I've changed," Grace observed him closely, looking for any sign of deceit but found only sincerity. "Emily's already suffered too much waiting for a dad who wasn't there," Grace said gently. "Don't hurt her now that she's finally found you." Business journals were quick to notice the changes. First came the fact Noah delegated to Mark the presentation of quarterly results. Then the cancellations of international conferences, his absence at major dinners, and the empty office after 3 o'clock. "What happened to Noah Parker?" blared the headline of the Business Chronicle. From workaholic to missing in action, the mysterious transformation of TechVision's CEO. The article speculated about trouble within the company, undisclosed health problems, even a possible mental breakdown. No one considered the simpler truth. The man who built an empire had discovered his most important project in a suburban blue house, clad in a red coat, patiently waiting for him. One afternoon, a major security breach threatened one of TechVision's top products. The engineering team was in a panic, millions of customer data records potentially at risk. Normally, Noah would have dropped everything, no matter how long it took. But that night, Emily had a ballet presentation, her first time dancing in front of an audience who knew that her father would be watching. "Mark, you and the team have 2 hours to come up with a plan," Noah announced. "I'll be back after 7. My daughter has a show, and I promised her I'd be there." Mark's face showed both incredulity and admiration. "But Noah, this is a crisis, I know," Noah finished, grabbing his jacket. "And we'll solve it. After I watch my daughter dance like a butterfly for 3 minutes." Only Grace and Emily witnessed Noah's expression during the show. Emily, wearing improvised blue wings, timidly fluttered among other tiny butterflies. There, in the third row of an elementary school auditorium, the powerful CEO of TechVision quietly wept tears of joy and sorrow for the moments he had missed. As summer approached, the dynamic between Noah, Grace, and Emily continued to evolve. The blue house that once belonged exclusively to mother and daughter often included a third occupant on weekends. Noah still kept his penthouse, but he spent less and less time there. The idea of a shared home had yet to be voiced out loud, though it hovered in casual conversations about bigger yards or the possibility of adopting a dog, Emily's dream. "Did you know that lot on Maple Street is for sale?" Noah remarked one evening while they washed dishes. "There's space for a dog to run," Grace smiled. "Are we planning to adopt a dog now?" "Emily's always wanted one," Noah answered, as if that explained everything. Grace studied him with that penetrating look that always seemed to read deeper meanings. "Are we talking about dogs or something more, Noah?" He smiled. "Maybe we're talking about possibilities, about futures we can build if we choose." Grace didn't reply immediately, but her answering smile held a promise. On a particularly hot Sunday in June, the three of them were in the small backyard. Noah had brought an inflatable kiddie pool, one of those colorful plastic types. Emily wore a red swimsuit, racing in circles while he struggled to inflate the pool with a hand pump. "You know we could have bought one with an electric pump, right?" Grace teased, offering him lemonade. "Where's the fun in that?" he panted. "Is it almost ready, Dad?" Emily asked for the 10th time. "Almost there, Princess," he said, still getting used to the word Dad and the rush of emotion it triggered. When the pool was finally filled, Emily jumped right in, splashing water everywhere. Grace, trying to stay dry, ended up as soaked as everyone else. Instead of getting annoyed, she surprised them by grabbing the garden hose and aiming it at Noah. "Hey, that's not fair," he protested. Emily giggled, clapping. "Get him, Mom! Get Dad!" What followed was a water fight, where everyone ended up drenched. Noah, the man who handled billion-dollar deals with unflappable poise, now ran around the yard trying to dodge the spray from a literature teacher and a 6-year-old. When he finally surrendered, collapsing onto the grass, Emily flung herself on top of him, hugging him tight. "We got you, Dad." "Yes, you did," he admitted, hugging her back and glancing at Grace, who watched with a soft smile. "You really did get me." Grace sat down beside them, her wet hair framing her face in a way that reminded Noah of the day he first met her, years ago. It had been love at first sight then, and now, in a surprising twist, he felt that same love rekindling, deeper, more mature, and more profound. Emily, lying between them, pointed at the sky. "That cloud looks like a dog," she said dreamily. "Her big dog, like the one I've always wanted." Noah and Grace exchanged looks over their daughter's head, a silent connection that was becoming more natural each day. "Maybe it's a sign," Noah mused. "Maybe," Grace agreed, gently touching his hand. In that perfect late afternoon moment, Noah Parker finally understood the truth he had been searching for throughout his adult life. Success wasn't measured in acquisitions or business headlines. It wasn't found in boardrooms or private jets. True success was right here, in this modest backyard, in a wet, giggling embrace, in a shared moment of genuine happiness. The trip that really changed his life wasn't the one he took years ago that led him to the CEO's office. It was this journey back, this rediscovery, this reconciliation with parts of himself he had abandoned on the path to ambition. "What are you thinking?" Grace asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Noah smiled. "I'm thinking that some journeys take us exactly where we need to be, even when we think we're moving away." Grace seemed to understand. She always had, even when he himself was lost. Emily suddenly leaped up with the boundless energy of childhood. "Can we do this again tomorrow, and the day after that too?" Noah looked at Grace, a silent question in his eyes. She smiled, the same smile he had once left behind, one he had somehow found again. "Tomorrow and the day after," Grace agreed, "and any day we want." And so, as the sun set over that little backyard, Noah Parker, not the CEO, but the father, the man who had finally discovered his true purpose, embraced the moment with gratitude. A new beginning, achieved by someone who learned the hard way that true success isn't measured by corporate titles but by moments like this, simple, genuine, and filled with love. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.